So I just want to go over some of the features on this T-Magic chassis. As you can see, I've got a brand new chassis here for mine with all the various pieces that it comes with. I just want to go over some of the features on this chassis because it's actually a pretty good design, apart from not being quite long enough for what I'd want. But it is a very compact and interesting design, so I just want to go over it, show you some of the features. Now, starting at the front here, you've got a screw that goes through the shock tower onto the bulkhead. Then you've got two screws here which go straight into the top of the diff case to strengthen all the front up. Then you've got two bits here which the steering post screw into, and the front brace, which you can see there. And then moving a bit further back, the servo mount is actually pretty sturdy, so it's like connected fully with a plastic piece, and this is moulded into the chassis, so it is very sturdy and quite thick, unlike some of the other cars. So it doesn't actually move, and it is pretty strong, but unfortunately it isn't replaceable. So if you strip out any of these screws or your servo somehow snaps this off, you have to replace the whole chassis, which is a bit annoying, but they are pretty strong. It has got a removable cover on the bottom here, which you can get to your servo horn with, just taking two screws out, which is pretty nice. Moving back a bit, you've got this like channel moulded into the chassis here for this wiring harness, and it has a little cover which goes over the top there, which is pretty nice because it just makes sure none of the wires get caught in the gears or in the drive shaft, which runs over the top of it here. And this wiring harness itself is really good as well, because it goes onto the side of the centre chassis brace. At that end it's got 3 plugs on it, and then it's also got one that goes to the back, and all of these plug into just one port on your receiver, which is quite nice. And on mine you can see I've got the servo plugged into one of these ports, and then the other one is running a fan for the motor there. The actual kit comes with lights as well, if you buy one of these RTR, and it has front LED lights, which it also uses for this. So even as standard, it's only using 2 plugs and you have one free, which is nice. You can also put LEDs on the back, or a fan, an extra ESC fan or something if you wanted to. So that is a pretty nice design. Now in the centre of the truck there's this plastic piece which goes in, which is like this centre diff / spool holder, and that fits in there. It's really solid, and the motor mount is really good as well, because this is a sliding motor mount, a 2-piece one. So you can see there's the piece that the motor bolts to that slides in. So a lot of 1/8 scale buggy conversion kits and stuff you see, the motor mount will be only held in by 2 bolts. This one's a lot better. You've got 2 holding it into this plastic piece here, which is then bolted into the chassis with 4 bolts, and you've also got another 2 here and here which bolt directly into the chassis. So this is basically being held in to the chassis with 6 bolts, and this plastic piece with another 2 from below, and then you've got these 2 cap head screws here which go through it that way. So this motor mount and centre diff piece is really solid. Now the only trouble is you can't get this plastic piece in aluminium, unfortunately, because that would make it absolutely indestructible. And you can see there's the channels and cutouts for the bearing carriers in both the motor mount and the plastic casing there. The spur gear goes on this side, and the centre diff goes in that bit, and it is almost fully covered as well, because when you put that in and you put the centre brace in as well, you can see that there's a spur gear cover that goes all the way around that only has a hole on this side for the pinion and spur gear to mesh. So that is pretty nice and solid actually. So moving over to the back, you've got 3 posts here which your receiver box is set on. You can see the receiver box up there, and it's quite good because it means you can shove all your little cables underneath and cable tie them all together, and then your receiver plugs in on top. This gap here is actually for the ESC switch, and the ESC is designed to sit on top of this piece here, and then you can have your wire coming from your ESC straight down there, like I do here, although my switch is in a different position, because unfortunately this switch on the Hobbywing Max series doesn't fit in the little switch holder, which is in this little bag here. Now a quick run ESC switch does fit in here, and the RTR switch for the Max 10 SCT 80 amp version does fit in, but unfortunately the Max 10 SCT 120 amp doesn't. Now the problem is with the gap in this chassis is it does create a weak point, because if you can imagine, this side piece here stops the chassis from flexing up like that, stops it bending, and on the other side it is completely solid all the way along, but in this side it's got a gap. If you don't have the switch holder in, you can end up cracking the chassis like you can see here, which isn't very good on my current chassis, which is why I bought this one. And the other thing as well, with it being a plastic chassis, even though it is pretty strong plastic, if you land directly down on a rock or something and it's quite sharp, it can punch a hole right through your chassis, unfortunately. However, I've had these stainless steel skid plates on mine since brand new, and so that has not been a problem, and it's probably protected the chassis many times. However, it hasn't prevented this crack appearing here, unfortunately. If I had a really heavy rear landing, which is what happened at the skate park that I reckon that did this, unfortunately the chassis can't take that. Now the other thing that helps the chassis from bending is this top brace, which goes all the way down the chassis, which is great. It's one solid piece all the way from the back to the front, and it's got the moulded in bit for the centre diff, which is really nice, and the place to put the ESC on. They do an aluminium one of these to make your chassis stiffer. However, it's over £100, which is basically a third of the price of the truck. It's actually more than a third of the price of the truck, so it's not really worth buying, which is kind of annoying. And it's all CNC machined, this entire piece, which is pretty crazy. But this piece here is like £12, and the CNC version is like 10 times more, which is crazy. So it's not really worth getting, unfortunately. And I think one of the main problems is with this piece is these little plastic tabs on the bottom here. They go on top of the bearings for the centre differential. You can see they're just slots there, and they effectively go in over the top and hold the bearings in place. And what happens over time is if your bearings start to wear out or whatever, these do get worn out here, and you can't replace them with metal ones because they're moulded into this whole piece. So the aluminium one would be a lot better in that regard, at holding your centre diff straight as well, which is a bit of a shame really, but it has advantages and disadvantages, this being one piece. Now the other thing that this has is three little ridges here, and that's actually designed to put your motor wires through. However, the motor wires on a Max 10 SCT combo with a 3660 motor unfortunately don't quite reach, so I have to do them directly, and I have to actually put an extension on one of the wires. However, I've mounted some of my other cables and my switch through there, so I've got the temperature sensor for the motor and the switch going through there. But that's another good sort of cable management feature. You can tell it's really well thought out. in terms of the wire management, which is great. Now moving on to the back, you've got 2 holes here which the bottom of your bulkhead screws into, and then you've got 2 holes up here which the brace and the centre diff screws into. So you've got a smaller brace on the back opposed to on the front. So on the front, those 2 holes are down here and they've just got screws into them, whereas on the back it is a brace. So on the front the brace is a bit wider, so it goes in those 2 holes. The back it's a bit narrow and goes in these 2 holes, and that is because the ESC is right there, so you couldn't have a brace going from the tower to the centre of this, which would be a lot stronger in my opinion. But whatever. Yeah, I've never had a problem with the towers bending. As you can see, I've got the standard, just stamped aluminium towers, and they're both completely dead straight. I never had a problem with those, so that's really good. I think that's about it for this chassis look and overview. I'm going to be swapping all of these parts you see here onto my new truck, or onto my old truck rather, and I've also got a full new wheelie bar here with all of the parts. This was only £5 from America, although it ended up being about 20 quid by the time I shipped it, but that will replace this broken piece here, which you can see is snapped off unfortunately. And I noticed as well that this bit down here is also cracked, so I've got a new full wheelie bar basically for really cheap. So I'm going to put these parts on my truck, and it should be as good as new basically then. So we're going to do that now.